you could read my mind, you wouldn't be smiling. Tamara Ireland Stone, New York Times, best-selling author. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Self-immolation. It's all the rage today, seems like. There've been at least two. I think there were a few others, but at least two that were notable. Aaron Bushnell and Max Azzarello, how you pronounce his name. Aaron Bushnell committed self-immolation last month in protest of the conflict in Gaza. And then Max Azzarello last week in protest of more like government conspiracy. His was a little bit less defined. It seemed like it was very broad. He got into a lot of conspiracy theories about the government, what the government was doing. And he and he had some writings and stuff like that, but it seemed to be very broad, so it wasn't very specific to a particular thing. And when it's a problem, I think issue, and we should not glorify it because a lot of people, they were comparing him, and I'm going to try and get the name correct here. Duke, which I think is how you say it. It's the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who self-immolated in 1963 in protest of how and that resulted and there was the infamous picture of him sitting there in lotus position, just burning very silently without saying a word, and that the picture got back to the United States, and the United States put pressure on the Vietnamese government, and things changed for the better for them. And so a lot of people were comparing Aaron Bushnell to the Buddhist monk who had that um, who had committed self-immolation. And I criticized people for that, and I said, "Look, I think there's actually a mental health issue." And so we're going to talk about that. But before I get into why I think that we might be experiencing some mental health problems and that may be more of a cause, I want to talk about this comparison to the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, Thích Quảng Đức. I'm going to try. It feels weird coming off the tongue because that's not like I don't really those aren't names that I generally think about, and it's just not something. It's not a way that I generally weird when I'm trying to say the name, but I'm trying to be courteous and at least use the name. But at the same time, not to the Buddhist monk. Seems like I might be having some video problems, so I don't know. Hmm. Okay. Well, anyway, if I'm having video problems, folks, just let me know in the comments. I saw some things flickering or something here, in StreamYard, so I don't know what's going on. Maybe there's a connection issue. I'm not really sure, so we'll do my best here. But at any rate, um, so I believe that what a lot of people are doing is they're doing something called resulting when they suggest that Aaron Bushnell is doing something that's beneficial based on what happened with the Vietnamese Buddhist monk. So I want to read you something. This comes from the book Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, notable poker player. And she wrote this book. It's titled Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. Now, you might say, well, Dio, what does that have to do with self-immolation? Well, it has nothing to do with self-immolation so much as it has to do with how we look at what other people do and determine whether or not it was a good thing. So let me read this little excerpt here. It's under the title, The Hazards of Resulting. And we'll discuss what resulting is in just a moment. Take a moment to imagine your best decision in the last year. Now take a moment to imagine your worst decision. I'm willing to bet that your best decision preceded a good result, and the worst decision preceded a bad result. That is a safe bet for me because resulting isn't something we do from afar. Monday morning quarterbacks are an easy target, as are writers and bloggers providing instant analysis to a mass audience. But as I found out from my own experiences in poker, resulting is a routine thinking pattern that bedevils all of us. Drawing an overly tight relationship between results and decision quality affects our decisions every day, potentially with far reaching catastrophic consequences. When I consult with executives, I sometimes start with this exercise. I ask members to come out to our first meeting with a brief description of their best and worst decisions of the previous year. I have yet to come across someone who doesn't identify their best and worst results rather than their best and worst decisions. So, what is resulting exactly? That's where you say, well, I've done this before and nothing bad happened. So, therefore, it must have been a good thing. That's resulting. Resulting is determining whether or not a decision was a good idea based on the results. So, how do we tie this in with self immolation? When people came out and they said, a lot of people came out and they said, well, Aaron Bushnell, he was protesting the conflict in Gaza and how Israel is treating the Palestinians, and therefore he's doing the same thing that Thích Quảng Đức did. And a lot of people point to Thích Quảng Đức because he got results, not because they're familiar with his decision, but because he got results. He got the results that he happened to want, which was a change in how the Vietnamese government was treating Buddhists. But the question is, can we look at that and say, well, that was a good decision? Well, most of us aren't actually in a position to say that for any of them, whether it's Aaron, Max, or the Buddhist monk. And the reason is we don't have access to all the information that they had when they decided when they decided that they were going to burn themselves alive for some cause. We don't know what kind of factors that they considered. We don't know their mental state of mind. We don't know if they had considered anything, whether or not this event would actually cause the change that they were looking for. We have no knowledge of that information. So we have no business suggesting that somebody like Aaron Bushnell or Max Azzarello are doing a good thing because, hey, look, this Buddhist monk once upon a time did it, and look at the results he got. I think this is a dangerous position for our society to be in, to start suggesting that you too can be like this. And we do it throughout our society. And I think that this is the large cause of a lot of young people trying to be rock stars and trying to be maybe go to Hollywood and become famous, right? Like we see people getting on YouTube and trying to become YouTube famous now. I think a lot of people believe if I just do this thing, well, this good result can happen to me because look, it happened to this person here. But we have to be mindful that a lot of people have went before us and did not get that good result. So our decision cannot be based on the good outcome that somebody else had. And we cannot look back and say, well, this person made a good decision because look how things turned out. And it turns out we do this in our life all the time, even for simple things. We might say, well, I've always done this minor thing and it's always worked out well for me. So therefore, I'm going to continue doing it because it was clearly a good idea. And I think Annie Duke, when I first heard about resulting from Annie Duke, she was on a podcast. I believe it was the Bigger Pockets podcast, which is a real estate podcast. And she was talking about so one of the examples that she gave was, let's say a husband and wife decide to take a new route to a restaurant that they've either been to before, or maybe they've never been to, but it's a new route. They're going to go in a new direction, and so they take this route, and then They don't have Google Maps, and then they find out that there's an obstruction. Maybe there's a car accident and they get delayed and they don't get to the restaurant for another half an hour. Or, like it takes a half an hour longer than they expected. Well, they might go back and say, well, that was a bad decision. But the thing is, they didn't know if it was they can't say that it was a bad decision because that was information unknown to them at the time. They didn't know that there was a car wreck. It's not like they said, "Well, there's a car wreck, but maybe by the time we get to it, it'll clear up." That would be that you might look back and say, "Well, that's a bad decision because you took a gamble on something that you didn't know would happen." But just the mere fact of saying, "I'm going to take this extra route or this different route, and hopefully it's going to get us to the restaurant quicker than the normal route that we're used to taking." If if everything else says this is a faster path, when you consider like say the speed limit, the duration, the stoplights and how long, the distance. Once you consider all of that, if you determine that yeah, this route would be faster, then your decision was a good decision even if you get stuck in traffic, because you couldn't know anymore that there was a wreck on that path than there was the route that you were going to take. And so that's resulting, and we do it all the time. I mean, it could be something as simple as dinner or something as extreme as looking at this Buddhist monk and saying, well, yeah, he made a good decision. Well, I don't know that he made a good decision. It turned out well for the Buddhist. But then the question is, was there some other way to draw attention? Would there could there have been any other way other than setting himself on fire to get that result? The result of the Vietnamese government easing up on Buddhist. There might have been. I don't know. So I'm not in a position to say that it was a good decision just because it turned out well. And I think in the context of today, it's very dangerous because if we're seeing a rise in mental health issues, then what we're effectively telling people is this could be you, in the same way that a lot of young people are lured into, maybe I could be a famous rock star. Maybe I could be a movie star. Maybe I can be a YouTube star, a famous podcaster who gets up in the morning and just kidding. But that's the point being, we're telling people that somebody else's good result could be theirs, and we're not teaching them to make better decisions. And I think this is a problem in the context of mental health issues that I believe we are experiencing. So let's take a look at why we might think that we're experiencing some mental health issues. So let me first pull up. Now, I did some research on Aaron and Max. There's no research to talk about the Vietnamese Buddhist monk because like there's no. This was in 1963. There weren't a lot of, I didn't. As far as I could tell, there weren't friends that somebody could go and interview and say, "Man, what was his state of mind? What was he like?" So we don't have that kind of information, but we do have some of that for at least Max. I didn't really see any for Aaron, so it's unclear to me whether or not there's evidence that Aaron was experiencing some mental health issues. But we do see that there are some issues with Max. So let me pull up this article from the New York Times. Where'd my mouse go here? And let's see here. There we are. Let's get this up on the screen and we will talk about it. So this is an article from the New York Times. I've got it from the Wayback Machine so that I can actually read it. A life overtaken by conspiracy theories explodes in flames as the public looks on. Friends of Max Azzarello, who set himself on fire outside Donald J. Trump's trial, said he was a caring person whose paranoia had led him down a dark path. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read a fair portion of it. The journey that ended with the man setting himself on fire on Friday outside the Manhattan courthouse where Donald J. Trump was being tried seems to have begun in Florida with a series of increasingly bizarre outbursts. Standing in the afternoon chill, the man, Max Azzarello, 37, of St. Augustine, Florida, threw pamphlets into the air before dousing himself with an accelerant and setting his body ablaze. The police hurried to extinguish the flames. He was taken to a hospital burn unit, gravely injured. He died on Friday night. The fire, just a block or two from the courthouse, appeared calculated to draw widespread attention, horrifying bystanders and temporarily overshadowing the momentous trial of a former president. But a closer look at the path the man had traveled to this moment of self destruction revealed a recent spiral into volatility, one marked by a worldview that had become increasingly confusing and disjointed, and appeared to be unattached to any political party. His social media postings and arrest records suggest the immolation stemmed instead from a place of conspiracy theories and paranoia. Until last summer, Mr. Azzarello seemed to have lived a relatively quiet life. After high school, where he was a member of a bowling team, he graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2009 with degrees in anthropology and public policy. All right, let's skip down here a little bit further. Where we go? An old friend from high school, Stephen Waldman, called Mr. Azzarello one of the smartest people he knew. He was a good friend and a person and cared about a good friend and person and cared about the world, he said. But there was a cause for concern too. By last year, he had apparently settled in St. Augustine, where he lived in a modest apartment near the Matanza River in that historic city. He was a pleasant, if sometimes peculiar neighbor. An extremely nice person, said Larry Altman, the property manager at his apartment building, who added, he had political views that I would not consider mainstream. He called our government and the world government a Ponzi scheme. But there were no signs that he was harboring an urge to harm himself, Mr. Altman said. If you met Max, he'd shake your hand and you'd have a nice conversation, he said. He'd treat you with respect. He was clearly deeply affected by the loss of his mother, however. Elizabeth Azzarello died on April 6, 2022, near Sea Cliff, New York, on Long Island, where she had fought pulmonary disease, Mr. Azzarello wrote on Instagram in April 2022. I am immensely proud to say that she navigated the awful challenges of this disease with strength, dignity, and spirit through the very end, he wrote. After this loss, his old friends saw a change. That was around the time when he became more outspoken, said Mr. Waldman. They were close and they had a good relationship. He was heartbroken. By the following year, the clarity Mr. Azzarello had shown in writing of his grief was gone and a troubled image emerged. In March, and this is the last I'll read. In March 2023, he listed his profession on LinkedIn as, quote, research investigator, self-employed. In June of that year, he tagged Ms. Brennan and several others to make sure they had seen something he had written. She described it as a manifesto and called him immediately and tried to intervene. Eventually, she wrote to one of his family members to make sure they were aware that he was in crisis, she said. Oh, I'll read one. This is the last part. About 5 months later, in early August 2023, he posted on Facebook about visiting a mental health treatment facility. 3 days in a psych ward, and all I got were my new favorite socks. Hmm, that's very interesting. It's very sad. It sounds like Mr. Azzarello had some mental health issues prior to setting himself on fire. So this is not good, right? We're already one out of two people that recently made news appears to have mental health issues prior to engaging in self-immolation. So let's continue. What do I got next here? Up next, I want to read something that's very interesting. So I was doing a bunch of research because what I wanted to know is like, what is the state of mind of people? And is there a cause for concern when we glorify one person burning themselves? In other words, do we potentially create copycats? Well, the answer is maybe. Maybe. You might think that's kind of crazy, right? Like, why would somebody copycat? Like, that's a pretty horrific way to die. However, if your mental state of mind is not in a good place, then your reasoning is off and it could be disastrously off. And if we're talking about, hey, this was a good thing because look at the results that this guy got over here, then we as a society could be giving people that extra bump to actually go through with it. So this was an interesting article from NPR. And let me pull this up. Let's see here. Where am I? All right. So there we go. Here's this article from NPR. This was in 2018. Self-immolation rises as desperate Tunisians seek escape from poverty. Hmm. So let's take a look here. And I'm going to mess up some of these names, so I will do my best. In downtown Tunis, Hosnia watches from the sidelines as Tunisians celebrate the 7th anniversary of the country's revolution. A wide-brimmed baseball cap keeps in shadow his face, badly disfigured by burn scars. Kalea is the less well-known instigator of Tunisia's 2011 uprising. Like Mohamed Bouzi, the fruit seller who set himself on fire after police confiscated his fruit car, Kalaya's self-immolation in those same weeks also caused Tunisians to take to the streets in protest that ultimately forced President Zain El Abidine Ben Ali from power. But for 42-year-old Kalaya, January 14th marks a much grimmer moment. He sees it as the anniversary of the moment he inspired his half-brother's suicide. My brother was younger than me and always looked to me for inspiration, he said. I feel guilty because I feel that somehow I gave him the idea to do this. In 2015, 5 years after Kalaya's desperate act, I'm just going to call it Saber, his 25-year-old half brother walked to a garden near his home, poured a can of gasoline over himself, and lit the match. He was not alone. In recent years, self immolation in Tunisia has gone from being relatively rare to commonplace. Dr. Mehdi Ben Kelly, a physician at the Nicole Hospital in Tunis, took part in a nationwide study that compared self-immolation fatalities in Tunisia before and after the 2011 revolution. The study, which looked at cases between 2006 and 2015, found that the number had tripled since the uprising. He also has data from a more recent, still unpublished study. I've also, quote, I have also the figures from 2017, and I can tell you we still have 3 times more the cases of self-immolation as before the revolution. Before the revolution, an average of 10 to 12 people per year died due to self-immolation. Now that figure has risen to an average of 30 to 40 people per year. The head of the Dr. Amin Al Masadi, the head of the intense burns unit at the Ben Arous Hospital in Tunis, the main burn ward in the country, has noticed a significant increase in the number of patients admitted to the hospital due to self-immolation. So I want to get down here a little bit though. So in Tunis, they're having a rise in self-immolation. And the article goes through and it does point out, so it says that the months immediately after the 2011 revolution, this could be explained by what's known as the copycat effect, when people imitate an action by a celebrity or one that has been widely discussed in national and international media, right? We saw pictures of Mohammed Bouzizi and his family everywhere. He got posthumous prestige. This effect generally is expected to last a short while. We would expect a decrease 3 years after the revolution. But now what we observed in this increase remains high even until now. So what they're saying is like, okay, we get it. There could be copycats in the short term because copycats see the grandeur that somebody else got and they might seek that out, right? This is the resulting. Hey, if they burn themselves and they got this kind of reward, this social reward, then I will get it too. That's resulting because you can't guarantee that. You can't really even bank on it. And then they find out that it continued after it would be expected to drop. So now, you get to a certain point and you say, okay, well, now the the prestige, if you will, the social validation has worn off. So therefore, you would start seeing a decrease, but they don't. So what I found most interesting about this article, well, there's actually a number of things, and I'm trying not to read the whole article, but here, the psychological profile of the average victim is changing too. Before the revolution, said Kelly, self-immolation victims had a history of mental health illness. We're going to touch upon that more. But now more and more people with no previously recorded psychological problems are doing this. Now, let's be clear. Just because there's no previously recorded psychological problems doesn't mean they aren't there. It's a good possibility that they're there. I don't know that particular country. I don't know the people. I don't know the vibe there. So I can't really speak to it. So we go down And we're going back to this gentleman who the article is about. And let's see here. All right. So Kalaya says his half brother, Kalfati, set himself on fire after he lost his job as a cleaner in a hospital in their hometown of Kasserine. He did it because he wanted to be heard, said Kalaya. Kalafati had now seen Kalaya suffer from his self-immolation. Kalaya spent a year in the hospital, mostly unconscious. He says doctors were shocked that he even survived. So this man, whose half brother committed suicide by self-immolation to be heard, did it. He feels he did it because his older brother did it. Hey, my older brother did it. Things turned out for him. There's some social validation, so on and so forth. He spent a year in the hospital. When he woke, he could barely recognize his own reflection. Now, skin grafts cover his neck and face, scars drag down his lips, his ears are half burned away, and his hands reduced to stubs. But Kalaya says, and this is what I think is very important. Kalaya says it's impossible to understand the pain of setting yourself alight until you have experienced it. He remembers feeling terror and regret and smelling his own flesh singe seconds before he lost consciousness. I think this is what we need to start communicating out to the world. We need to start communicating that setting yourself on fire is a serious matter. It is probably more serious than you can ever realize. And there is a good chance that at some point before you pass out, before you before you pass out or even die, that you will regret it. That you will say, this was a terrible mistake. I should have not done this. That is the message that we should be sending people. Now let's talk about this mental health crisis, because in that article they point out that, hey, it seemed like there was a psychological profile where a lot of people, they had previously had some sort of psychological disorder, and then now some of them at least don't have a recorded one. So what's going on? So let's take a look. And what do we got here? This comes from the National Center for Biotechnology Information. This is a study called the investigation of the demographic characteristics and mental health in self-immolation attempters. So let me throw that up on the screen there so that you can see it right along with me. All right. So there we are. I'm going to zoom in just a wee bit so that it's a little bit more legible here. So self-immolation is a heinous way to commit suicide, which is mostly prevalent in individuals who attempt to escape a stressful situation and is considered as a strange and unusual method. Okay. So their study here, the objective was to examine demographic characteristics and mental health in self-immolation attempters in the city of Bandar Abbas. So let's go down here. I'm going to read this. Where did it go here? This is where I want to read. All right, it says mostly prevalent in individuals who attempt to escape stressful situation. Self-immolation is considered as a strange and unusual method in Euro-American culture. People commit self-immolation mostly due to different social and economic reasons and as a political protest. Okay, not sounding too bad there, right? Like, hey, there's different reasons that people do it. Sometimes it's political protest. But here's the next line. The majority of attempters of self-immolation have records of previous suicide attempts and psychological disorders such as personality disorders, schizophrenia, economic and social problems. In other words, they're not coming from a good place to begin with. They're in a stressful situation. They're looking for a way out, or, as the NPR article pointed out, to be heard. And then it goes through and it says they start referencing other studies. In a study in 2004, concluded that among other psychological disorders, mood disorders was associated with the highest suicide risk in both males and females. Another article maintained that the highest suicide rate was observed in subjects suffering from dysthymia and major depressive disorder. In a study by Donald and Cameron during 1990 to 1995 of 1,072 subjects who referred due to burn, 40 of which had attempted self-immolation, it was concluded that schizophrenia, depression, and personality disorder were diagnosed in 71% of them. Goodwin and Marzik reported significant. Uh, I lost my place here. Hold. reported a significant relationship between psychological disorders and suicide attempts in their study in the U.S. In a study on the characteristics related to suicide attempts, Lopez and Cast Roman concluded that the most prevalent cause of suicide attempts are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and alcohol use disorders. Another study declared that 17% of suicide committers suffered from panic disorder, 9% from other anxiety disorders, 33% from schizophrenia, 40% from depression. A 10-year study in Verona on 31 committers of self-immolation by Castellini and whoever name revealed that most subjects had records of psychological problems. Among theories concerning suicide, theories of Durkheim, Freud, and Menninger can be noted among others. Nowadays, however, some people may not accept that a specific psychological dynamics or risk personality structure is associated with suicide. Okay, so what am I reading all this for? Like, what's the point of reading all of that? There's a whole bunch of just whatever. The point of reading all of that was to show you that there is a huge overlap between mental health issues and those who commit suicide and those who commit self-immolation. And self-immolation is effectively suicide. So far as I know, nobody commits self-immolation with the thought that they're going to come out of it. So you can look at it as somebody wants to commit suicide in a very public way. But if we look at people who have committed suicide, there is a huge overlap of people that have mental health issues. In other words, it is not a sane thing. I mean, we probably all know this. It is not a sane thing to want to set yourself on fire. It is not a sane thing to want to commit suicide. And I want to play a clip, one clip here. This comes from the Tom Woods show he had on Spike Cohen. You might remember a while back, I did an episode where I reviewed Spike Cohen's debate with David Hogg. And if you hadn't seen that debate, I encourage you to go see it. But in there, they're talking about suicide. And I want to point something out to you. So let me play this clip from Spike Cohen.
So here's what the gun control side does. You'll notice they always say gun violence. Gun violence is 5 things. Suicides, which make up 2/3 and growing of the share of gun violence. As all of the other forms of gun violence continue to drop and suicides, after many years of dropping, has started rising, it's making up a bigger and bigger share. It's the only reason that gun violence is rising, because everything else is dropping. So you got suicides, you've got homicides, which for decades have been on a long-term trend of dropping. You have justified killings, which as the crime rate drops, so does the correlating rate of justified killings. You have police killings, which also tends to rise and fall with the crime rate. The crime rate's going down, so police killings are going down. And then you have accidents, which have dropped by around 90% over just the last 40 years, at a time when licensing is at its all-time lowest, proving that licensing never made us more safe from gun accidents. But all of those are dropping. Accidents are becoming a non-factor at this point. It's suicides. This is a suicide problem. So what they'll do is they'll use the thankfully very rare instances of mass shootings, and then they'll couple that with a graph saying gun violence is on the rise. No, suicide is on the rise. The actual, when people think gun violence, they think murder. Murder has been dropping for years as the rates of gun ownership have continued to go up. As the number of restrictions, the net number of restrictions on our ability to own guns has gone down, proving that this is not a gun problem. Gun violence is a suicide problem. It is not a murder problem. It is not. It is just the only thing that's going up is suicides. So we're facing a mental health issue. People are feeling increasingly hopeless. That's not a gun problem.
Okay. So notice what he said there, and kind of set aside the parts that deal specifically with, the arguments that are dealing specifically with guns, and just think of it in terms of, he's pointing out that suicides are going up, and that when we talk about gun violence, of the 5 breakdowns for gun violence, the only one that is going up is gun suicides. That's what's going up, suicides. And he pointed out multiple times, we have a mental health problem. People are feeling hopeless. That is what we need to be addressing. We do not need to be glorifying the idea of self-immolation by suggesting and telling people that are likely in a mental health, a negative mental health status. We do not need to be in any way suggesting to them that, hey, maybe whatever it is that's got you motivated, maybe that can be addressed if you would only set yourself on fire. And that is the message that we send. And there were a lot of people online. I saw it. People all and notable people. We're not talking about just randos. Let's see if I can pull this up because I'll try to pull this up really quickly. I won't put it on the screen, but I'll just read it to you. But I think I can find it relatively quickly. So let's see here. Let me do a little bit of a quick search. So here's here's what I said. So I had said, and I pointed to this art to the study that I just read, and I said available evidence says those who commit self-immolation have underlying psychological issues. The man is no hero nor villain. He was a man most likely with mental health issues, pretending otherwise for a cause, no matter how admirable, does not help the next person. Stop. That's what I said about Aaron Bushnell. I said that in response to Dr. Jill Stein, who happens to be a medical doctor and a presidential candidate for the Green Party. She has 291,000 followers. So this is not somebody with a small account. This is not somebody who's a rando, and they've got some sort of, cartoon character, for their profile pics. This is a real person who goes out and says, I want to be president. And this is what she said: rest in power, Aaron Bushnell. Quote, I will no longer be complicit in genocide, free Palestine. She's quoting him. May his sacrifice deepen our commitment to stop genocide now. So she took the opportunity to glorify him, right? So did Alex happen to see this post? I mean, I don't think that this one post sent him over the edge, right? But did he see like this post or post like it? Did he see people talking about self-immolation of Aaron Bushnell in a positive way? And if he did that contribute to his decision to do it himself? Well, this guy got attention. Maybe I will too. And if we're dealing with mental health crisis and the data seems to support that if you commit suicide, if you commit self-immolation, you probably have mental health issues. Now, we might look and say the Buddhist monk who did it was an anomaly. We all know, we've all read the stories about Buddhist monks doing wild things, and they've got a great social circle, and they really try to get in tune with their mind and all that. So we might make the argument maybe that they were of a more clarity of mind than the typical person. But that does not excuse us suggesting that other people could be like him. In fact, I would argue it makes the case even stronger that we shouldn't, because he's an anomaly. Maybe, again, maybe. I don't know. I can't say whether he was in a good state of mind and he thought this decision out and was ready to do it because I'm sacrificing for the good of my community. I don't know what his state of mind was. But even if we hold that it was a decent state of mind, that he was not suffering mental health issues, that is not most people by the data. We do not, and we need to condemn people for coming out and saying things like rest in power and may his sacrifice deepen our commitment to stop genocide now, because you are giving the thumbs up. You are telling somebody, good job, posthumously. And then, of course, what you're telling people in general is, if you want to do this, then good job for you too. This is that's your sacrifice for us. Go ahead, sacrifice. And we're going to talk about it in a positive manner. And for some people, maybe that's the only positive talking they'll get. I don't know. But what I do know is that so far the evidence is not in favor of self-immolation, and that people that are thinking about it, we need to help them. We don't need to condemn them. We just need to say, no, this is not a good idea. And this is not going to help whatever cause that you believe it will. In fact, it may distract from it temporarily. So I want to point out something. A lot of people came out and they said, well, Aaron Bushnell, like, look, he self-immolated. And what about the guy in Vietnam? And I had people, when I criticized the idea, they would post like a picture of the Buddhist monk burning and, kind of like saying like, well, this guy did it. Okay, well, fine. Now that we're a little over a month out from Aaron Bushnell having committed suicide by self-immolation, has anything changed in the Middle East because of it? No, not at all. So if you want a result, if you want to talk about, hey, was that a good decision or a bad decision based on results? Hey, it was a good decision for this Buddhist monk to do it because look how it turned out. Well, then you need to do the same thing to Aaron Bushnell and go, I guess that was a bad decision. Unfortunately, it's also a bad decision on your part if you supported it. And it was a bad decision then, it's a bad decision now. So I'm not even resulting. I called it a bad decision in the first place before I found out whether or not Aaron Bushnell's act of self-immolation would cause any kind of change. Now I want to pull up one more thing, and this comes from the CDC. So let's go ahead and take a look over here. And on this is because Spike Cohen was saying, hey, suicides are rising. Okay, is that true? We should look at the data and see, is that true? Are suicides actually on the rise? Well, here we have, this is under an article, Fatal Injury Trends, and they have a graph here. And so you can select the injury type, and I've selected suicide, and it goes back from 2023. Now, 2023 and 2022 numbers are provisional, which means they're still evaluating them, but we can go with it for now. So we can look and we can see that 2023, and I've got 2023 and 2022 highlighted right now. So if we just click on, let's see here, click on one. So this is 2023's numbers. So we are in April right now. So let's go hover over it and we will see what April shows us. So it says for April in 2023, 4,015, down a little bit from 2022, which was 4,024. But both of them are up from 2021, which is 3,722, which was up from 2020, 3,473, which is down from 2019, 4,029. And that was up since from 2018, which was 3,900. So so we are actually up from numbers in 2020, which were actually down. Numbers went down in 2020 and 2021. COVID may have played a role in that, but they're back up again. So suicides are on the rise when they were actually low. That's for the month of April, of course. And if we look at, if we look at the month of April, that's not even the highest month for 2023. It looks like their highest month might be January, or let's see here. Nope, it looks like May. May, it looks like, is their highest month at 4,300. So 4,305 for 2023, 4,375 for 2022, but that was up from 2021, 4,091, but again, down in 2020. Oh, I'm sorry, up from 2020 and then down from 2019. So in 2020, the highest month, at least according to 2020, so the highest month from last year, when we look at that, which is May, and we compare it, we see that it's at 4,305, which is down a few from 2022, but it's still up from 2020. So it does appear that suicides are indeed on the rise. Now, these are provisional numbers. They could go up, they could go down a little bit, but the likelihood I expect is that they're not going to change too terribly much. And we will still see that suicides are on the rise. What does that mean? That means we have a mental health issue in this country. What is the cause? I don't know. What is the answer? Stop glorifying suicide. And in fact, that's always the answer. It is always the answer to not glorify suicide. We don't necessarily have to condemn them because people were in a bad place. And we don't want the people that are out there in a bad place now to feel condemned. We want them to get help. We should express sympathy, not glorification. We should also say That's not how you make change. The fact that the Buddhist monk was able to get change by his self-immolation, that is an anomaly. He got lucky. He got lucky that by the time the picture came over to the US was horrified. US leadership was horrified to see this photo. And they said, we need to put pressure on the Vietnamese government to do something. And so that's what caused it, was people feeling horrified. But the more that it happens, the less people will be horrified. And it was an anomaly then. And we should consider it an anomaly now. It's not something that people can expect to happen. So whatever their cause is, and we don't have to worry about judging Max's position on the government or Aaron's position on the government. Be that it be whatever it is, fine. Everybody can have an opinion. You can look at information and say, hey, there's a grand conspiracy here. Or you can look at a conflict and say, hey, this side is, being too aggressive. They're the aggressors now, right? That's what Aaron Bushnell did with the conflict in Israel. He sided with the Palestinians, and he said Israel is the aggressors. That's fine. You can have that opinion, but we should draw the line at saying that opinion does not turn into action to help whoever it is that you're trying to help by you committing an act of self-immolation. That's not how it works. More than likely, your death will do nothing. And you are better off living to fight another day. Start a podcast, donate money, give your time, whatever the case may be. Write a book. Those would be things that are better off. Staying alive to convince your fellow man and woman about whatever idea that you hold. That's your best bet. It is not to commit suicide by self-immolation. You might get a few cheers from people who don't care about you. But before you do any of that stuff, before you do any book writing and blog posting and what have you, get help. That's the message we need to send to people. I sympathize with you. I get it. You're frustrated. Let's get you some help. That's how we make a better society. We don't make a better society by glorifying somebody dying for no good reason. And when I say no good reason, meaning they can't bank on the outcome. It's just a gamble. You're better off buying a lottery ticket. You're more likely to win the lottery. I mean, I don't know statistically speaking, but just casually saying it, you're more likely to win the lottery than you are to stop the war in Gaza from burning yourself. More like I'm pretty sure the statistics bear that out. I don't know for sure. I'm not a statistician, but I think just casually speaking, most people would agree with me. All right, folks, that's my show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. And I want to tell you about something that's coming up here. So let me see if I can't put it up on the screen here, because this is exciting. So tomorrow morning, I will not be doing a show. Not tomorrow morning, because I will be doing a show tomorrow evening. Where's my graphic here? I want to pull the graphic up and show it to you. There we go. All right. So let's pull this graphic up here. But bam. So tomorrow night, Karen Ann Harlos, secretary of the LNC, the Libertarian Party, the National Libertarian Party, she and I will be doing a podcast, a joint podcast episode. It'll be on my podcast, but we're doing a joint effort. We're going to talk about neutered masculinity. And you're like, what in the world is that, Dio? What is neutered masculinity, and what answers are you talking about? Well, she recently had posted a story on, let me see here. Where am I? Let me get myself back up on the screen here. Let's do this. So she recently posted a story about being on the train, and there was some guy, I think he was a bum or a hobo or something like that, and he was harassing a woman. And she said, look, not a single man stepped up to help. And man, I tell you what, every loser guy jumped out of the woodworks to tell her, all the reasons why they, that was a bad idea and that men shouldn't help out. And just so we're going to be talking about this because I was very critical. I was not critical that nobody helped per se. I was critical more so, I mean, that too, but more so that people jumped online to rule out helping somebody because they were like, well, look at Daniel Penny up in New York. He did that. Was it DC? I think it was New York. But they said, look at Daniel Penny. He did that and he got arrested. He's on trial now. Okay. Sometimes doing the right thing requires putting yourself in danger. That's what it means to be brave. But again, I'm criticizing not so much that nobody did it, but that slightly, but more so that people ruled it out without actually being in the situation. So Karen Ann and I are going to discuss this. And here's the fun part. Normally on my podcast, I keep it clean. Now I'm not going to go ranting crazy and dropping like 40 F-bombs necessarily. But if you wanted to hear a gritty DL, tomorrow night will be the time. Tomorrow night, I will be talking with Karen Ann, and I'll probably have a glass of wine or something like that to kind of help, lubricate the brain cells and whatnot. And we're going to talk about this, and I'm going to tell you why we should not necessarily rule it out and what the proper perspective is on being a man and dealing with situations like that. So I want you to look forward to that. That's tomorrow night, Wednesday, the 24th at 8 p.m. Don't worry, I will put out like I normally do through my channels. You will see the live stream on Twitter. You will see the live stream on Rumble. You'll see the live stream also on YouTube. So look for that tomorrow night. But tomorrow morning, I will not be doing a podcast episode because I will be doing it in the evening instead. And that allows me to sleep in so that I can make sure to have the energy that night. Because usually by like 9:30, I'm pretty dog tired. When you get up at somewhere between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, 9:30 is pretty late. So that's what I'll be doing tomorrow. I've got some other good things in the works. So look forward to some new things coming your way. But for now, I want to thank you again for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there subscribing, hey, drop me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.